I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And today we are talking about a legendary genius, one of the great men of history.
Our Da Vinci, perhaps.
Well, our Franklin. A new American Franklin has been born. And that is, of course, Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., the current Secretary of Health and Human Services for the United States of America.
Got a real job.
Yes, but before we get into all that, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the things that have been going on in the news? One of the first things is this anti-Tesla protest movement.
Is it a movement?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a part of it per se, but you just sent me a tweet that showed Tesla was down, 15% just today? Was that correct?
Just today. It's down just a quick. It's 18% over the week, 37% over the month.
Oh, so clearly the plan is working.
Yeah, so what is driving the dip, as they say?
My understanding is that
people don't like him.
Well, they hate him for one thing. That's a big part of it. Another part is that Europe has basically completely stopped buying the cars because of their hatred of the United States and the tariff and just the Trump-Musk thing. Like the dyad of Musk and Trump is just like insanely toxic, believe it or not. So in Germany, for instance, I think the sales have just fallen completely off a cliff. And you know one thing about Germany, it is that they like cars. Someone even said,
do you think they're buying? Were they buying the Cybertruck over there? Do you think? I feel like that's a very American design.
I don't know. I don't have any insight on the sales figures in Europe, but what I do know is that they're not buying it anymore if they ever were, right? And I mean, I think with the hostility towards China in the administration, any possibility of Musk ever breaking into that market has kind of evaporated. So, the funny thing about Tesla...
well, he was bragging about the Cybertruck after the explosion, right? Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
And he was like,
well, if it
would be way worse if it wasn't a Cybertruck. If it
had any other car, there would have been mass death because the Cybertruck is essentially a tank, right?
But it turns out that in Europe, one of the reasons it's not available is there's concerns about the design just not meeting basic European safety regulations.
Of course.
Particularly regarding, this is what it says, particularly regarding its sharp angles and, I love this, potential for pedestrian injuries.
Right. I mean, that's a big thing with a lot of American cars in Europe, right? Is that they're all huge and it's quite easy to run over smaller people.
And having a Cybertruck in Europe would also just be insane on the roads.
You're driving that through Avellino or whatever. You get it wedged in an old Roman gate. Right.
Oh, I love it. I see the Cybertruck even in LA a fair bit, and I'm like, how do you drive around like the hilly, like the winding hill roads area?
I mean, they have a lot of power. Like electric engines are.
Yeah, but they're just huge, and like there's parking on both sides of roads in this fucking city.
When you're going up in the Topanga Canyon or whatever.
Yeah, I'm having a stomach issue, but we can get into that. Have you ever done that? Have you ever purchased something to eat and then it didn't go well, and then time passes and somehow you find yourself getting it again, and there is even an awareness of
last time this didn't go so well. Well, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place.
I will tell you, one of the places where like marketing has worked on me for sure is Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
I just feel so sure of everything. It's cheap. It's so cheap, right? I don't know if I want to know how it got so cheap. I know they say it's that they cut out the middleman or whatever, but every day I'm waiting for the Trader Joe's shoe to drop. That we're going to have like an expose about how the fuck these prices are so low. But some of the sections notoriously cheap, the frozen section being one of those. And a few weeks ago, I got 2 packs of, I mean, even just saying, I got mini cheeseburger sliders.
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember
You know
those.
the type of thing where you see them on the box and even the image of the food is disgusting,
The
right?
idealized
Like when you see
depiction.
like a commercial for Taco Bell, what's amazing is like it looks bad. On it's not like when you see a commercial for Applebee's or Chili's, the burger's always so like plump and the bun is perfect and the tomato and lettuce is like wet and beautiful condensation.
Yeah,
But like this cheeseburger like looked bad on the thing. And I ate it a few weeks ago, just because something you get frozen food and then that's what you use it for when you don't have anything else to eat.
yep.
And my stomach just got destroyed. And then today I was in the exact same predicament food wise.
And you had
And I
those
just
the other pair in the
I could have
freezer.
just walked. I could have walked 5 minutes, and I just had the other box. And now I just genuinely don't know if I'm going to get through this. Without, like, anyway, and they were like $3.99, so it's hard to turn down, right?
Sure, sure.
So anyway,
Well,
if you hear any guttural noises, take it up with Trader Joe's.
yeah, I shall. But just to wrap up the Tesla thing, so there are these organized protests that are happening at
Yeah,
Tesla dealerships. There was a big one here in New York City where a bunch of people even like got into the showroom and were arrested. And I saw some
and
videos
they're just
on,
like chanting "down with Tesla" or like
yeah,
anti-Doge.
it
Is it
seems
all
very
combined?
anti-Doge. It seems very anti. I mean, that seems to be the real engine that is driving this. It's the idea that Musk is just like bringing about the firing of like tens of thousands of people for
Mhm.
utterly capricious and in some cases evil reasons, right? And people don't like it. And how do you
Yeah,
manifest that distaste for him? You protest his businesses. I mean, this is like,
yeah, and you sent me a picture where there's just like a full
well, I was in
full
Chicago
line,
too. So, like in other
dozens of
cities,
cops
yeah,
lined up outside a Tesla showroom protecting Elon Musk's private property, or I guess
yeah,
goods. Or
yeah. I mean, it was just one of the more stark, visions of the way the police
yeah,
function primarily to protect private property and little else, right? Protesting in this country has really kind of come under fire.
mhm.
There's this graduate of Columbia who's being deported despite being here on a green card, Mahmoud Khalil, and he was one of the organizers of the protests in the spring, and he was essentially arrested in his apartment and kind of black bagged, taken first to New
Yeah,
Jersey.
like they didn't know where he was at least at first, right? Like for
Yeah,
a
I
while.
think now, well, he's not. There's been a stay. Like they can't deport him. Like he has
Yeah.
like legal challenges. Like luckily, a judge stepped in and said, like, hold up here. Like we gotta answer some questions. Seems
Mhm.
very concerning, to quote Elon Musk.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, Trump said it was
First of
the
many.
first, yeah, to come. And so we were talking about this a bit before, but you know, you're hearing that they want to charge him with like material support of terrorism,
For
something.
protesting the mistreatment of the citizens of Gaza by the Israeli
Yeah,
army. Which,
yeah, which it seems like that. I mean,
well,
again, it
we
was a bit like why is any of this happening? But like, I think it's sort you can actually track the evil here a bit better than what we were talking about with the tariffs and stuff the other day, where like if he can establish that like heinous precedent, it just gives such wide scope to
yeah,
his ability to crush any type of dissent. And you then combine that, not to be overtly doomer, but it feels like it's somewhat reasonable at the moment, where like combination of this type of behavior and the ability to make this type of arrest, whatever the hell you want to call it, um, that the combination of that with this opening up of, seemingly everybody's personal, private financial information, by having
by Doge
one
or
of the
whatever. Yeah,
yeah, and one of the like most influential, holders of data in the world on the side of this, ironically sort of anti-free speech government that can kind of like look up anybody they want, you think like when at, at the drop of a hat for anything, if and sort of sift through old Instagram stories and
right. I
grid
mean,
post
Musk is the
protests.
one. Musk is the sort of tip of the spear on this, but we saw Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg were at the inauguration right behind him, right? I mean, this is
and they themselves, like Bezos, is like totally shifted his so-called opinion page.
of the
Did you see
Washington
that?
Post, yeah, which is now
Where they're
only
just
going to
like
be talking about free
stories
markets.
only on two pillars. That's it, the pillars. It's like, what was it, like freedom, economic freedom, and personal liberty, or
Yeah,
something?
that's right. Free markets and personal freedom,
Yeah.
which has led to Janet Marcus. I think that's her name. No, Ruth Marcus. I'm thinking of Janet Malcolm, combining her. Ruth Marcus, longtime columnist, has been a columnist there forever. I remember teaching her columns in 2008 when I was doing a class on the 2008 election and writing, how to write about politics. Did not go well. No, it went fine. But she's been there forever and is just resigned. Was like, yeah,
Yeah. And the opinion editor left as well.
Of course. And then now some stooge is in there. So it just seems like one thing that I saw mentioned in regards to a lot of this stuff is the First Amendment doesn't just protect American citizens, right? It's supposed to be freedom of speech for all people that are under our laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be increasingly sliding away towards this.
I mean, or it's getting, the sliding away of it is getting much more visible. I mean, I think that you would be able to talk to a lot of organizers in this country who have experienced things like this in years past, right?
Yeah. But it's a little
again,
different.
I think that's like, I also think that's like an important thing to just mention is that while, it feels similar to, the differences of the excesses of these powers between like George W. Bush and Obama, and what are those differences? Like, but they're still there in every administration. I mean, we were talking about this before we started, but like Biden's treatment of these very same protesters
has obviously completely paved the way for.
It's paved the way, as with so much of this.
And
Democrat,
to say nothing of the like intolerant attitudes towards dissent by the administrators of universities themselves, right? I mean, that's
right. That's right.
Pretty sort of reversal of the university's historical role. Another thing I saw Danny Besner tweeted was just like, don't act like the United States doesn't have a long and proud history of deporting green card holders and citizens. And it's like, this is all these horror stories from the 1920s and 30s of, American citizens.
And now, do they know where he is currently being held?
Apparently he's in Louisiana somewhere. Hopefully
has there been any explanation for that?
I think that's where they do the deportations from. So they're probably just like holding him on a military base, getting ready to put him in a plane or what have you. Yeah, it's very grim. We'll keep track of the story. It seems.
I mean, his wife is 8 months pregnant.
Yeah, it's really.
Again, not that. Whatever. It's just so sad. It's so brutal.
Yeah, it's horrible.
But that's the thing, man. Like, again, like it's the combination that we talk about in this podcast all the time. Of like, it's the half joking, tongue in cheek, the end of the world with Michael and Stu, but it is like this combination of these things happening right now that are so horrible, but that also seem to sort of augur this greater collapse of the social dynamic. And I think, we'll get into it right now, but it's like the combination right now just sort of seems to be sort of an increased domination of corporatism, control. You can see that in the pictures of Chicago Police Department officials being lined up outside of a Tesla to make sure nothing goes wrong there. And then you've got on top of that, like this supposedly cavalier pro free speech administration that is, of course,
just deporting people for speech.
So you get, anti-dissent movement happening at all levels of this government as well. And then, you get into like what happens when, the social fabric decays to the point where fewer people are taking vaccines, fewer people are taking care of themselves, taking care of their communities. And that's where this guy comes in, right? That this is the puzzle. That like, if we live in something of an era of crisis, and those crises do include public health, this just seems to be yet another version of why the hell is Trump deliberately tanking the economy.
Yep.
Why of all the people? So if you want to just like introduce
all
exactly
in all, it was all only bricks in the wall, to quote Roger
yeah,
Waters, right? So we're talking about Robert Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was born January 7th, 1954 in Washington, while his father, the beloved late Senator and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, was working for the House Un-American Activities Committee, part of his career that is often sort of swept under the rug. But he was one of the attorneys working with Senator Joseph McCarthy and Richard.
He loved McCarthy, didn't he?
Yeah, he was one of their Irish Catholic buddies.
Well, the Kennedys were like amazingly anti-communist dudes, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like really Red Scare.
But they were gonna end the Vietnam War, Michael. They were gonna make peace with. Come on, let's not get into that. All right. So obviously his dad was RFK. His uncle was JFK.
Never heard of him. Yeah.
They were both assassinated in the 1960s. Obviously, Bobby was 14 when his dad was killed in California in 1968, and he grew up largely in Hyannisport.
Struck a pretty sympathetic figure, obviously, which is reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible to have your father murdered, basically, in
on
public.
Stage.
Well, he wasn't on stage; it was backstage. But
But he had just been speaking, right?
Yeah. Now it's on to Chicago and let's win there, were his last words, and then
alas,
didn't happen.
And also ran in the '68 election.
Well. Okay. He also grew up in the.
Would he have won? Would he have won? Do you think?
I think there's a lot of debate about that. From what I've read,
because he wasn't winning.
No, he just won California, which is a big deal.
Yeah, but he wasn't winning the delegate count.
Well, because back then, like the primaries didn't matter as much, and it was much more of a backroom kind of thing. And I think Humphrey had the inside angle. But Kennedy grew up. RFK Jr. grew up on Cape Cod and at the family estate outside D.C., which was the home to a menagerie, interestingly. A large number of exotic animals and things living there. After his father's death, he kept getting...
Which he's maintained a romantic connection to for the rest of his life. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. I'm sort of laying the bricks for that path for that stairway to heaven, if you will. He was expelled from several second-tier boarding schools, Millbrook and Pomfret. For
did you just say second tier?
Sorry, maybe third tier.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean Millbrook's
for our northeastern.
Well, sorry, so not everyone can go to the Hotchkiss school. I think Hotchkiss is one of the 5 first-tier boarding schools. I don't know if this
top tier, man.
This has changed. It's a sort of Exeter, Andover, St. Paul's, Choate, Hotchkiss. We're always, in my opinion, the top 5. But there's probably some of this. Groton is a good school too. There's a lot of other good schools. Lawrenceville maybe.
But then there's Millbrook and Pomfret, which are just
nice. I've been to both.
That's fine. You get in. That's okay. Nothing to be ashamed of. But
you're gonna maybe you could get into Wesleyan from there. It's maybe if you're lucky. Play your cards right.
You put your head down. If you put your head down, we can see.
Or if you just are really good at basketball or something, maybe maybe then you can go to Harvard. Maybe if you're lucky.
He looks like he would have been an amazing point guard.
It's true. It's a sort of John Stockton figure. Unfortunately, despite being expelled repeatedly, I think there was another school he was expelled from at this time because of drugs, because of mischief making. I mean, he had a reputation growing up as just being like a terror on Cape Cod.
Yeah.
He was the leader of kind of gang of miscreants that would just set off cherry bombs in people's mailboxes and stuff like this.
Yeah, like pranksters, but also like Carolyn accused him of drug pilling members of the family.
Yeah. Caroline Kennedy.
Like, I don't think he had boundaries. I think when he calls himself a prankster, he's probably committed some very serious crimes in the name of youthful pranking.
Yeah. I mean, right. And when he did go to Harvard, the family tradition, I'm sure there was no nepotism element in his getting
from Millbrook, not even from right.
Well, he got expelled from Millbrook, right? So who knows where?
Yeah, I guess.
But Harvard looked the other way. They said, "Come along." Family's been very generous to Harvard. And while at Harvard, he became addicted to heroin, which he claimed allowed him to concentrate for the first time.
He loves to show a very bizarre apparent like counterintuitiveness about the world.
Well, that's
would be
right.
like what?
That's like the center pillar of his whole
Like,
philosophy.
every time I ever think or read anything about heroin, first thing I think is, wow, this really seems to help people focus.
I mean, focus on like staring into the void.
What he claimed, yeah, it's like what he claims happened to him, and you're just like, well, why would you say that?
He's like, I can finally read for the first time. I think that's what he actually said. Anyway, he graduated from Harvard somehow and eventually went to law school and failed the bar exam several times in New York State, much like his cousin, JFK Jr., would famously do a little bit later. Seems to be a weird Kennedy family. The bar exam's like a hurdle. Maybe it's because...
Well, John wasn't that bright, correct?
I don't think Robert F. Kennedy seems to be that bright either, Michael.
Yeah, I guess that's true, but I think like...
Well, here's the thing. Like, the bar exam is something you cannot use nepotism to get by, right? You actually have to just learn the laws and statutes and whatnot. And like...
Yeah.
So I think that the fact that these guys...
I can't speak with any authority, but I know that recently Maggie was listening to a book about the Kennedy women, I believe, like an audiobook, like, while she's around the house. So I would hear sections, and one of the sections was about how John was like not really with it, and like got into the George magazine.
Yeah, of course.
You know how he started that magazine? Then he had no idea how to run a magazine, and he didn't really know anything about politics. It's just very funny to think of like the way that he's perceived of because of who he is and like how he looks.
Tragic early death.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
Because there was a notion that he was going to run for president. I mean, again, not that you have to be intelligent to run for president, but yeah, apparently, like, according to the book, it was like really hard for him to do these tests.
Yeah. Well, I think when you've lived a life of privilege and not had to jump through any actual empirical hurdles along the way, when you are faced with one, it's going to be difficult. Eventually, RK did pass the bar in 1985, and this is only, of course, after being busted for heroin possession in South Dakota in 1983, when he would have been in his late 20s. Look, I'm not casting aspersions.
People indiscretion as well. Yeah, me too. But that's a classic thing of
people have drug addiction. Like that's
fine.
Yeah,
it's just how they couch it, right? Like, didn't Bush when he was 30, right? And then he was like, "Oh, it was a youthful indiscretion," and it's like, fine, you can do this stuff in your 30s, but like, don't say that it's a youthful indiscretion.
Right.
Like, not.
Yeah. After finally passing the bar, he became the environmental lawyer, which is the sort of time of his life when he seems to have actually done some good work. Although even
the time in his life when it like makes the most sense with his name, right? Like, one can imagine. We were talking about this just last week with the episode we did about SAFE, right?
Yeah.
Exactly the same time, late 80s. She gets environmental illness. It's all about the toxins in the air and pesticides and all that stuff.
And one of the big things RFK did was work for this organization called the River Keepers, which is exactly about that. It's about like keeping.
And that you could see a world where Bobby himself, if he was at that same age in 1985, that the environment could very easily have been his entryway into national politics. It's not inconceivable. Given what was going on and, given what Bobby was writing about in the 60s, right? It does seem to be the moment in his life that tracks the most with sort of his dad's legacy almost.
Absolutely. And, reminds me, of course, of our old friend Al Gore, right? Al Gore. That great man.
Did he ever get on heroin?
No, he did not.
I'd love to see him just vibing.
And maybe he is now. I mean, he's been out of the spotlight for a while. He and Tipper have the open.
I'm sure he'll be back in 2028 to reclaim the mantle.
Maybe
there's a vacuum right now, Stu. Anything is possible. It's him or Stephen A. Smith.
That's true. It's true. He had a couple of big victories against chemical companies who were polluting. That seems good. The Riverkeepers organization, there seems to have been some drama. There were a bunch of people resigned. He had the whole board replaced at one point, brought in some more of his people who were loyal to him. Just typical kind of backroom drama. Several times in the early 2000s and in 2006, he kind of flirted with getting into politics. He sort of floated himself as a Senate candidate in 2000.
I've done that. yeah, maybe. Just throwing it out there.
Oh, Michael Terry's hat has been thrown into the ring.
Yeah, that's right.
That was, of course, I think Daniel Patrick Moynihan was retiring, and that became the Senate seat for Hillary Clinton, which...
Real sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
Is that right? I don't know. Is that a sliding doors moment?
Yeah, if RFK gets that Senate seat instead of Hillary.
Right. Yeah, goes on to lose to Trump in 16 years later. Who knows?
Yeah, a lot could have happened. He also sort of was thinking about trying to run for New York Attorney General in 2006. I think that was during the whole... I think Andrew Cuomo was the one who ended up winning that election. So in both cases, he considers running, looks at the opposition, and it's like a much more hardened kind of machine politician opposing him. Andrew Cuomo, Hillary Clinton. These are people that, like, you're not gonna
that did the work that someone like
and that are gonna destroy you.
Someone that his dad and John did do, right? He just hadn't done that.
Andrew Cuomo was also a nepotism case, right? I mean, his dad was Mario Cuomo, but to his credit, like, I think he did a little bit more legwork than Bobby had by that point. Now it's around.
So he said that he didn't want to run, and he cited his need to spend time with family.
Yeah, that classic Kennedy stuff right there. Big time. So it's around this time that we get into the vaccine stuff, which is crazy, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
So
he was just having such a good time spending time with his family. Decided to go completely off the fucking rail.
The whole thing is quite weird. I thought he had been into anti-vax stuff earlier, but it's really around 2004, 2005 this pops off.
Right. So actually, I wanted to bring this up because we were talking about a bit about this before, where, like, obviously RFK Jr. has been in the public eye for a very, very long time.
Sure.
But unlike some of these people, I didn't really get introduced to him until the first few years of the 2000s.
Yeah.
And I think that actually NPR just put out an episode of Throughline, on March 5th.
Oh, wow.
That basically looks at how the anti-vaccine movement began. And the way I actually came across RFK Jr. for the first time in any real way was actually through Jenny McCarthy and Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Do you remember? They were kind of these weird celebrity leaders of the anti-vaccine thing, which ironically, like, I feel worked against the early anti-vaccine movement. It became, if I remember correctly, I feel like it was caught up in the bougie, foofy LA celebrity, wheatgrass drinking,
right, which
health nut
RFK is kind of adjacent to, right? I mean,
that's right. But, like, they showed, the reason I was saying I agree with you. I don't think that I really became aware of them until the same time you're talking about this hearing, where apparently it began with them, was actually in 2000.
Okay.
And there's a clip that I just want to, it's like, Jenny McCarthy's like, we do not need that many vaccines. Apparently there was an issue with just
the number.
There's just a quantity issue.
Yeah.
And then, she was the huge famous proponent of vaccines trigger autism. Her son, Evan, I believe.
Have we talked about that before? Like the Andrew Wakefield, the doctor from the UK, whose study all of this stems from?
Yeah, he's in this piece as well.
Okay.
But there was actually, people have become so obsessed with the CDC and Fauci, like, you forget, but, like, it turns out that in the year 2000, Jim Carrey was at Congress saying, and I quote, "I just want to start by asking the CDC one question. Just how stupid do you think we are?"
Wait, Jim Carrey, the political cartoonist?
Yeah. And then the crowd apparently erupted, all the supporters that were there for the hearing. And then turns out, just to bring it back to what we're talking about, RFK Jr. was a speaker at that event, at that rally.
In 2000.
In 2000.
Oh, really? So that's a little earlier than I realized. Because the angle I discovered was around 2003, 2004, 2005. He started reaching out to doctors in the sort of who work on vaccines. Now, just to go back to Andrew Wakefield, one thing that's important to remember is like his study that allegedly showed this connection between vaccines and autism had 12 people in it. It was a 12 child. That was the subject pool. It wasn't like 20,000. Right. It was 12, as in like 1, 2.
It's a small sample size alert.
Also, like his whole motive for it was that he was himself the inventor of an alternative vaccine. So the whole agenda was like, we need to get rid of the MMR vaccine. It's causing autism, and instead use my vaccine. So it's like there's just like a very transparent profit motive.
Conflict of interest, right?
Yeah, and that the study that was published, I believe, in The Lancet, was eventually withdrawn, right? Because it was cherry picked the subject.
Was this was the one that McCarthy
this is the one everyone this is where this all starts from.
Down on is the MMR vaccine, right?
You know, it's really interesting. I just recommend another podcast. There was this limited series that came out maybe last year or the year before called Vaccine, the Human Story that Annie Kelly, one of the hosts of the QAA podcast, did. And it's really excellent. And it goes back through the whole history of like anti-vax movements, which began in the 1700s, like where the first like inoculations against smallpox were starting. There were already people being like, this is unnatural or whatever. So it's a long heritage of this. But yeah, the modern anti-vax movement really pops off with the MMR thing and the vaccines cause autism. Just had a couple like thoughts about this. Like, why is RFK interested in this? Well, for me, it's like his concern about this is analogous to his concern with pollution, right? The main issue he's focused on, right, is that like you can kind of draw an analogy between like these chemicals going into the water of the river, right, with like the vaccine going into the river of our blood, right? And just like this sort of like pristine idea, this idea that there's just like some sort of pristine wilderness or pristine human body that is somehow being like polluted, and
as though there was this past where when we weren't, that there was some time when we were mere angels in the Garden of Eden, right? And if we can just go back to allowing our bodies to exist in such a fashion, then all of these evils will leave us, right?
As if like nature,
it's very similar to the movie we talked about last week, right?
Yeah,
and because what's interesting again with not just in this one regard, in many regards of this particular political movement that is in power and taking power right now, is that what they base their individual insanity on, whatever their portfolio is, what this is your insanity portfolio. You're going to be in charge of, government spending. Go nuts. You're in charge of anti-vaccine propaganda. Go nuts. But like, there is this either core of truth, or this very identifiable problem or enemy that is in some form real and in needing of fixing. And so all of the issues that you're talking about, pollution, the state of the environment, things that he was doing in the late 80s, early 90s, right? Those problems still exist, and very real things could be done. Instead, what ends up happening, much like in the movie we talked about last week, is that you develop this kind of sickness, whether it's whatever, galaxy brain or brain rot,
or brain worm, as the case may be.
The conclusions the conclusions these people make are digestible to many people, unfortunately. But again, they find their power in this grain of truth. It's very easy to get up and be like, Americans eat like shit. That's fair. The stuff that's allowed to be in our food is not good. It doesn't compare to other places in the world.
Right. That stuff is not allowed. It's not allowed in Europe. Like you can't do that. That's why England had to get out of the Eurozone. So like,
yeah. But like, that's how it's like articulated somehow at the end of the day is like, I can't explicitly tell you to go take the measles vaccine during a measles outbreak. Who knows? It's right? Like, what?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, there's this interview with this guy, Dr. Paul Offit, who was he's the director of the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital in Philly. He's a professor at Pennsylvania University at Penn, and he was like asked to comment on this as RFK was like moving towards being Health and Human Services, and RFK said this crazy thing in 2023 that there is quote unquote no vaccine that is safe and effective, and someone was like, well, what about the polio vaccine? And Offit writes, it's a reasonable question given that Kennedy was born the year before the polio vaccine was licensed and probably knew people who had polio as children, right? And like 20 to 30,000 people were paralyzed every year from polio, and 1,500 died. And RFK still said, no, the polio vaccine has killed more than it is saved. Which is just like, it's like, bro, that is like manifestly not true. Like, there's the numbers like do not make
one of these like weird. It's one of these weird counterfactuals that he likes to present that don't
unfalsifiable.
That's right. That's exactly right. Is it so much of what he says falls into that category, whether it's like some sort of supplement that just needed to be taken by more people that's not actually ever, he'll just say like, it's very Trump-like, just like the reports we're getting in, very strong for,
well, just today there was like a thing where the Treasury Secretary, one of these secretaries was like, you guys haven't seen the photos I've seen of all the secret fentanyl factories in Canada that are just shipping this stuff. And it's just like, bro, like Colin Powell, like with his mobile like labs in Iraq, it's just like, this is old hat.
Yeah, well, that you bring that up because it's like it is very similar to what happened with COVID with RFK Jr. So are you familiar with the like messages that I can't remember which one? It was another member of the family who is, get this, a doctor, and has this whole exchange with RFK Jr.
Bobby, yeah,
during the sort of real brutal days of
like March, April 2020.
Yeah, and she basically wrestled with whether or not to put these out, right?
You mean like what Bobby was saying, but then once he's running for president.
Yeah, because of course in public, whatever he's doing.
It's a sort of violation of his privacy as a family member or whatever, right?
Yeah, so yeah, but he's also out there being like, the vaccines,
the polio vaccine has killed more people than it's saved.
Well, like linking COVID to like the Jewish people who, they're the most immune. It was the whole thing,
like, and the Chinese people are immune, and Jews are immune, and it's targeted to kill black people and white people. What was it? There was some ludicrous claim.
Yeah, no, that's what it was. That's exactly it was Caucasians and black people, but somehow, it's designed. It was almost implied like it was designed, right, to not be able to kill Jewish people. I mean, the whole thing was so nuts. So, anyways, it's his niece, I believe, Carrie Kennedy Meltzer. It says here, who, very close to home, primary care physician at NYC Health and Hospitals. So in New York. So we're talking about
like where the epicenter of death was at the time.
And so it just like really sums up this. I think this sums up his position. He says, Bobby, this is the sister says, Bobby, I've been working in the ICU for the past 2 weeks, and we've taken care of too many people who have died or will likely die soon from COVID. None of them are vaccinated. I watched a daughter collapse on the floor while we pronounced her mother's time of death. I held the hand of a man who was about to get intubated. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, asking me to please save him. He will likely die in the coming days. I love you, Bobby. You are an inspiration to so many and are giving voice to people who feel they have experienced injustice. I just wish I could take you to my ICU and show you how much destruction this disease has caused. In fairness, that text from a family member does suggest that perhaps he didn't get vaccinated.
Well, but this is also, if this is March 2020, like that's before the vaccine was around, right?
True.
Or maybe, so maybe it's later. I don't know.
RFK Jr. responds that same day. So she sent this out. By the way, she put these out in an attempt to stop him from becoming the director of human health services.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. She's like, we should just say. So that's what she says. I mean, pretty heartfelt.
Yeah.
Pretty to the bone. RFK Jr.'s response. Carrie, I don't dismiss your experience, but
great start.
But I don't dismiss your experience, but it differs with data we are seeing from Israel, UK, and other nations with much more reliable data systems. You might want to ask your hospital to publish this data so people can take it seriously. The problem is that the CDC has been using corrupt metrics to assess who is vaccinated. The CDC counts all people as unvaccinated until 2 weeks after their second shot. We have seen dramatically increased cases and mortalities now following the first shot, and CDC is still counting them as unvaccinated.
Oh, so this is later. This is from like 2021.
Yeah, I guess
that's
so,
when
right.
the first shot thing started, right?
Yeah.
That's why we were able to go to that.
So it started in late 2020.
For the most vulnerable.
But they span 2 years. So basically, like, this person is telling him.
This is like, I'm seeing people dying still every day. They're not taking the vaccine. And he's like, these metrics differ.
Yeah, and this is one of the very weird parts of the anti-science movement, right? It's this kind of, again, like this counterfactual thing that is like, well, what's to say what would have happened? Maybe if he was unvaccinated, he actually would have been fine. Or maybe if we were all unvaccinated, it actually would have gone better. It's this weird sort of anti-human response to a situation that how can I put this? Because it can dress itself up as, ironically, detached in this seemingly objective scientific way. The irony of RFK Jr. telling this doctor to check the data is just like, I don't even know. Yeah, how do you continue?
Get your hospital to put that data out there so folks can know.
Yeah, just throw it out just so the public can start to see. Because right now, by the way,
the CDC is just corrupt.
Actually, all those people who are telling you they're unvaccinated, as they die, as they cling to life, actually they're fucking lying to you. And actually, if I had to guess, Carrie, they actually got vaccinated once and they're waiting on their second shot and they're so sick that now.
And they're dying because of the shot, is the implication.
Yeah, and they're dying because of the shot, but they're telling you they're unvaccinated. Like,
why would you not count them as being vaccinated? It's like, well, because the vaccine is not effective until 2 weeks after the second shot.
Right. Like, again, even from the human perspective, it's just like the idea of somebody who's like trying really hard not to die in a hospital, and the doctor's like, are you vaccinated? And they're like, no, but they actually were.
And they're lying. Yeah.
Seems so unlikely to me that unless he thinks that they're like, oh, well, I guess I should report as unvaccinated because I got my first shot less than 2 weeks ago. Like, imagine you're having that thought process while you're trying to breathe as you die from COVID. Like,
yeah,
that's what I mean. It's like, it's just, this falls in the category of like, what is this for exactly? Right? Like, what are the advantages to having this position, this type of position? And
it's that you can never be proven wrong, right? I mean, because no matter what anyone comes at you can always just question the numbers and bring out alternative numbers.
I think that a lot of people, when he got into his position, right, that there was a sort of justification among those, not that they really needed it, but sort of among those who were voting to confirm that a lot of this is sort of just blowhard grandstanding that can't be proven wrong. And once he's in the confines of the office, that his tone will change because the stuff that he's actually saying is often just not true. And now he's going to be in charge of like helping to coordinate responses to public health emergencies. And we have actually sort of seen that, right? So we've seen this measles vaccine, this measles.
Right. Well, initially he said, "Oh, measles outbreak is very common. It's nothing to worry about." One point of fact, like no one had died in over a decade.
Right. Again,
measles was considered to be functionally eradicated 25 years ago.
In 2000. Yeah. Yes. 25 years ago. But this is the thing, like, I guess you can just say that. You can just like, we are at this weird point where you can be like, oh, actually, if you look into it, there's actually measles a lot.
Yeah.
Like they imply always that no matter what we know, there is this thing underneath that you can just use, this weird gray area of supposed conspiracy to just go, every statement like that, like, oh, no, measles is actually quite common, is laced with this notion that if you find out that's not true, just look harder.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, like, just to go into a couple of things that we thought about reading his Fauci book for this, but it's 900 pages long and it's just nonsense. So I looked at a couple of book reviews. One from the Claremont Review of Books says, just a couple of examples from this. Dr. Fauci, RFK writes, doesn't do public health. By every metric, his 50-year regime has been a catastrophe for American health. And then the author says, but this is absurdly, if characteristically, hyperbolic. In Kennedy's own argument, public health depends on much more than medical care. But if we take two metrics, life expectancy and mortality rate, the former increased by 9 years and the latter decreased by almost 3/4 during the catastrophe that lasted half a century. So it's like life expectancy went up during this catastrophic period for human health by 9 years. He says, it's a pity that the book is so full of errors and gross misrepresentations that nothing the author says can be taken as true.
What a pity.
What?
What a pity.
It is a pity, yeah. That nothing the author can be taken as true unless known for certain to be so by the readers. Because there are indeed many questions to be answered about the pandemic, its origins, the worldwide response to it. It is rare that conspiracy theorists such as Kennedy have absolutely no evidence in support of what they say, albeit that they make 2 + 2 = 1,000, right? So in other words, like, even the craziest JFK 10 shooters, there's like a grain you could point to, like,
Elvis is still alive.
There's irregularities in the trajectory of the, there's like a shred of evidence you can kind of hang everything. Oh, Lee Harvey Oswald, this woman didn't hear him coming down the steps, so therefore he wasn't really on the floor. There's always like some shred of evidence, but for RFK,
right? Like, how could Oswald have created like all these bullet wounds this quickly? The magic bullet theory.
Well, it makes sense if you look at the diagrams. Anyway, so another thing is RFK advocates taking fluoride out of the water, says we don't need it anymore. Utah has now, just today, this week, mandated that fluoride be removed from all water. And it's like, well, no big deal. Well, I mean, except we live in a country where like virtually no one except people with good jobs have dental care of any kind. And, it's like, you can get an infection. This has happened to me. You can get an infection from a cavity that like goes to other parts of your body. Like I had a toothache infection that like caused the entire right side of my face to puff up. And I had to go on like, medicine. It's like, this is not just like people have more cavities. It's like, this will kill people.
And why did they make this decision?
Well, because there was a study that says that IQ in children drops by some tiny percentage because of fluoridation. A study that's very disputed, like much of this. But it's like, that's like with the Wakefield thing. It's like all you need is this one tiny like droplet of legitimacy, and you can use that to justify the most radical sweeping changes imaginable. And now, he's basically called off updating the flu shot vaccine for next year. So like every year the flu...
Right. This is what we've heard, right? Is that like the basic takeaway of the community that operates these institutions, right? CDC, HHS, basically have said that, while RFK Jr. has started making some more reasonable public statements since he took over,
so he backtracked on the measles thing, for instance, right? He eventually said people should get the MMR vaccine.
Well, he has never actually, I was reading about this today, he's never explicitly said that people should go in the way that someone in his position traditionally does, which often includes pointing out resources, how to locate those facilities, how to get what you need. But he did say, the exact quote was, still problematic. And this is sort of the loophole he's finding. So his backtrack looked like this: the choice to get a vaccine is a personal one.
Oh yeah.
Vaccines not only protect individual children, but also contribute to community immunity. So it is, on the one hand, this admission that it does help.
Actually, it's good, yeah.
But
it's a personal choice.
It has that very sort of American caveat in there, which is like, if you just don't want to, we can't make you, which is critical to these people's politics. And what the people who have been writing about this, who are in this community, are saying is that, like, that part is the part that is being implemented. So he can say the end of the sentence. He can say vaccines not only protect children, protect individual children, but also contribute to community immunity. But what he's doing is not only increasing the awareness of the personal choice of vaccines, for example, he's also creating, using resources to sow doubt that will lead people to make that seemingly personal choice to not get vaccinated. So that's something like the study you were talking about.
Yep.
He's opening that book up again. He's starting another study to try to prove the link between autism and vaccines. And we actually have this quote from a doctor named Dr. Andrea Love. Again, same thing, sort of in this world, an immunologist and microbiologist, these types of people who have become among the most hated in our country.
And we'll put links to all of these articles will be in the description.
And so Love writes, Love says, honestly, if you look at the purview of HHS secretary, the damage he could do is near infinite. That's crazy out of the gate.
Near infinite.
Like, that's like sci-fi dystopian horror level. Yeah. Near infinite damage. And none of his long history gives any indication he will actually do anything to improve health, especially for those of lower socioeconomic status, which is sort of particularly ironic considering.
Going back to the dental care thing, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. I can honestly say it has never been this bad. Okay. He could skew, redirect, reallocate grant and research funding towards fringe research. Now we've seen already.
Which he's already doing, yeah.
Yes, cut funding for education, public health initiatives, vaccine campaigns, public health interventions like fluoridation.
Or the flu
and
shot.
Slow or halt regulatory approval for vaccines, and so on. And like, this is the type of thing that totally blows up, potentially, the thing that has been festering since the time of sort of the worst of the COVID lockdown era that we have been talking about, that this is the perfect person, right?
Yep.
To take those dominoes that have been lined up, that have been fighting against science, have been fighting against vaccines, and so on. And so when the next thing happens, which I don't see any epidemiologist or immunologist who disputes that this will happen again.
Yeah.
Right. We are not looking at this not happening until 2118 or something.
Nope.
It is no longer a once in a century situation. That when that time comes, I've always sort of compared it to George W. Bush, right? In the sense that, like, one of the things about this system is that if you put enough people in big positions who can't do them properly, that it is inevitable that at critical historic moments, you will find somebody completely unable to deal with the scale of the situation they find the country in. So of all the people who could be in charge of this country after 9/11, it was fucking George W. Bush.
Sure.
And away we went. Totally
and also like the financial crisis also, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and then he ends his presidency with the financial crisis. Again,
and
totally out
Hurricane Katrina. I mean, three disasters.
Every time the rubber meets the road, these people fail so spectacularly that, like, people, because of Iraq and WMD, which itself obviously a disaster, like you said, like, people forget that, like, not only was the election relatively close until Palin gets nominated, right, in 2008, which kind of I mean, he was never probably not going to lose, but it was closer.
He surged ahead with Palin initially, and then Palin was revealed.
But then the Russia interview and all that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But like
good times.
But my point is that like people, I think a lot of times forget that like there were moments like the suspension of the campaigns.
Oh yeah.
For the two candidates to like come and meet in the fucking like cabinet room with everybody to like talk like, guys, there could be like a rough tomorrow. There's no money or whatever.
I'm suspending my campaign. I think that was
and this was the beauty, right? Because like, the big thing that came out, and this was like I think a somewhat important moment, was that what came out was that Obama essentially took a degree of control, and McCain just sort of, who also after Obama decided he was attending and suspending, McCain also is doing that.
Right.
But McCain sort of the thing that came out of the meeting was that McCain sort of like wasn't up to it, didn't understand it, didn't really have anything to say, right? And the trajectory carries on, right? Not to say that there weren't terrible things that happened in the Obama years,
sure,
but like there wasn't a public health emergency that we now clearly know hundreds of thousands of people who didn't have to die died because of the way this thing was handled and allowed to spread.
As happened.
And the reason that is because, again, at the critical moment, when something like this takes place, these are the people that are in charge.
Well, no, but I mean, the other thing is, like, the reason that it was managed at all was because of career civil service people like the hated Dr. Fauci, who is now seen as being like the greatest villain in American history by these people.
And that's sort of my point. That's sort of my point, that this is the chance. This is the chance for RFK Jr.'s legacy to be formed, which is when that happened in 2019, 2020, like you said, I mean, it was literally Trump going out on stage with career civil servants in the CDC.
Yep.
Right. He would be out there with Fauci
every day.
Fauci would like say something. Yeah. Fauci would say something. And then Trump would be like right there and be like, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but you could try this. And it's like, what?
Remember when Trump was like, we could shine a light inside our blood.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. And now, like Dr. Love is sort of implying, right, is that when these people take over, and this is sort of the theme of the second term, right, they have a degree of power and influence.
And we can get rid of all of these safeguards, like the Dr. Fauci's and the. I mean, Biden had to pardon Dr. Fauci for alleged crimes before leaving
and like
office.
All of whatever rung of the government you're talking about now, like the guy who's running the FDA, you think he's not going to work with guys like Bobby? Like this thing could just blow up in such a ridiculous way because, again, it's like Fauci, at least had some degree of authority over the response to this. That like if this was to happen now, right, what would the response look like with these people? So let's look at the measles moment, right? So he did say that, but he was also asked about what he has done and how they have responded, because it's actually really weird that we have measles again. Like, come on.
And it's spread to our friends in the north. In Canada, they have it too.
And it's still on the rise, as the doctor on the news clip that I put in the notes. So we won't play it or anything, but I did watch it just before we came on.
Sure.
And they asked him, like, so what are you doing to fight the measles outbreak? And he says, we're getting people vitamin A and providing ambulance rides if you need one.
What?
And he goes, and then he goes, yeah, we're getting great reports, actually great results. People using budesonide, which is a steroid. It's like 30 years old. A lot of people are taking cod liver oil, huge concentrations of vitamin A. Now, he said all of that in his response, right? Which is why I think it was Chris Haynes' segment that I was watching, who's pointing out that, like, in that whole response talk, he didn't say anything about a vaccine program.
Yep.
Right? He didn't tell the public that the federal government was shipping in thousands of MMR vaccines to get in the hands of people in that area, that here's where you can get it. He didn't say anything like that. He was like, we've gotten people a lot of vitamin A, and hey, anybody who's had to go to the hospital,
ambulance.
we're handing out ambulance rides. And it's just like, and this is, again,
what are we doing? Yeah.
This is a couple hundred people who so far have died, which is, a lot for a disease that was gone.
One person has died.
Sorry, like 200 people, right? 200 people have it.
So far,
but it's a lot for something that was gone.
That was functionally eradicated 25 years ago.
And the Peter Hotez was the other doctor.
Oh yeah,
and he was saying
he's come up before. We've talked about him.
He was saying that it's way higher than that. It's way higher than that.
Just the people haven't been tested yet, right?
Right. And he also he was asked about, just to finish up this part, but he was asked about the new study that RFK Jr. is commissioning to try to link vaccines and autism. And he says that he's had full conversations with RFK Jr. about this stuff.
Well, this was like Dr. Offit, the guy I was talking about earlier, had the same thing. Like RFK called him and he explained it all to him. And then
and he couldn't get through to him is essentially what.
Well, no, RFK pretended to understand everything, and then the next time he saw him, he was on TV talking about how this.
Oh, okay. So like what Hotez said was basically he talked to him back then.
Right. Offit talked to him in like 2004.
Okay, so similar time.
He was calling a bunch of these guys, checking in, and like.
It's like the first thing is this is what he said. There's a plausibility issue, which I love, which is like such an amazing own of like an academic to somebody. Like, so just first off, there's a plausibility issue. I love it. Yeah. Because we know that autism develops in the first and second trimester of pregnancy, not when you're getting a needle. That's how it works.
Yep.
So he then goes on to say, which I think is a very important point about sort of the tragedy of RFK Jr., which is that there are environmental impacts and there are things that pregnant women are given or take, or the way that they live in this country, that could perhaps be shown to be a link to increased rates of autism.
Sure, you live near power lines, you live near this, who knows, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that should be explored.
And this is what he's saying. He's like, you've got this guy with this platform and this energy, and if he could help work towards those links, you might actually help decrease autism. And he said this, he was the one who was like, and I said this, and I just couldn't, he couldn't hear me, basically, was the takeaway. And like, to me, that's the whole ball game with RFK Jr. To go back to his work in the mid 80s and the way that his life has seemingly spiraled out of control and he has failed up at the last in like a perfect Kennedy moment.
Yep.
He managed to save himself and now find himself in the most powerful position he's ever been in. But like, there's so much that you could do in this country, the sort of corporate influence over nutrition. I mean, there's so many things that you could do. And instead, you're just reopening that and telling people to take a few units of vitamin A. And
just get some vitamin A and, hop in one.
And if it gets really bad, just call us. Pick you up in an ambulance. You can ride through a red light. Would that be fun?
All right. Well, we're going pretty long.
Yeah, sorry.
We've kind of you're I love the passion, Michael. You've brought your A game once again. We didn't even get to
talk about any of the roadkill.
Well, I was gonna say, like, the other stuff with RFK that's just so funny is his propensity to collect dead animals. I mean, there's the bear in Central Park that he deposited after allegedly someone else hit it and he took it to eat. Because he was just going to eat a bear he found on the side of the road. Then there was the story of the whale skull that he decapitated a whale in Cape Cod.
I know we've been running long, but I do just want to read quickly the bear.
Please.
The bear thing is so good because he's like, and I love the quote in the article. It says, he explains matter of factly. So I pulled over and I picked up the bear and put him in the back of my van because I was going to skin the bear. It was in very good condition. I was going to put the meat in my refrigerator. And then, in perhaps the most Kennedy line I've ever heard, the article writes, Kennedy, the bear never made it back to his Westchester home, however. Kennedy says he got, and I quote, waylaid by a busy day of falconry.
Oh, yeah. And then he ended up
and then had to rush back to the city
to Peter
for
Luger's
dinner at Peter Luger's, which ran late. His bear's in the back of his car while he's eating,
just roasting in the sun,
getting that like tomato onion, like the classic.
Oh yeah.
Side. What do you got going on, Bobby? Are you not? I got a bear in my. But I'll tell you, I was gonna take it home, but I had to get a quick bite after all that falconry. It's too like perfectly...
Well, and then as a prank, they deposit it under a bicycle in Central Park to make it look like a bicyclist has hit and killed a bear in Central Park. And this is also part of some weird anti-bike lane agenda that he's on or something.
And it's like, which is funny because it's meant to sort of suggest that the bike had the strength to...
That bikes are like as dangerous as cars because look, it killed this bear. I don't know. It doesn't seem very well thought out to me. Also odd.
We should do an experiment. We should like a MythBusters where we try to ride into bears.
Where we get a bear.
We just drive our bikes into a bear and see if it kills the bear completely. Oh my god! But yeah, then the whale thing. We can just go really quickly. But this is Kathleen Kennedy as well.
Yep.
Fighting the good fight.
Wait, no. It's isn't this his daughter? I thought it was.
This is Kathleen Kennedy, who is his daughter. Yeah.
Right. This is not the same. This is not Carrie, who was the doctor.
This is not Carrie Kennedy.
Yeah.
This was when she was 6 years old. So she's 6 years old. Her dad gets word that a dead whale had washed ashore. He got a chainsaw, cut off the whale's head, and strapped it to the roof of their minivan for a 5-hour drive home. Now, obviously, that is nuts, right? Yeah. We're not going to debate that. But one would think that if that happened, right, in your childhood, that would just be the craziest thing that you ever saw your dad do, right? And she says, every time we accelerated on the highway, whale juice would pour into the windows of the car. It was the rankest thing on the planet. We all had plastic bags over our heads. Real public health nut.
Sounds safe.
My child, just put that over your head with mouth holes cut out. People on the highway were giving us the finger. But that was just, quote, normal day-to-day stuff for us.
Yep.
And it's like, if I had to draw like the perfect image of Robert Kennedy Jr. and the way that he has lived his public life, it's that story.
Yep.
I think. It's the idea of all of these people in the other lanes being like, hey, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
And him with his kids with fucking bags over their heads and whale juice pouring everywhere, thinking that he was doing something very good.
And normal.
Yeah, and normal. Right. Just normal day-to-day stuff for us.
Yeah, it's a remarkable man, and I think you've done a nice job of tying this in with how this truly could be one of the most apocalyptic subjects we've covered if these changes go through and the next pandemic does arrive during this tenure or in the immediate aftermath. It looks like it could be a complete disaster for America and indeed the world.
Yeah. I mean, the way things are going, he might be like vice president to Vance in 4 years. Who the hell knows?
Yep. Okay. Well, we haven't decided what we're talking about next week, so whatever. Well, that's all right. Whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be amazing, as it always is here at the End of the World with Michael and Stu. And if you would like to, you can subscribe the podcatcher of your choice. If you're feeling generous, you can tell a friend, tell a second friend, leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it might be. And we will be back next week with a scintillating topic of one form or another. But until then, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And we will talk to you real soon.